next speaker is going to be talking about this because she's no stranger to the Capitol. Jamaica Miles is here. Let's give her a round of applause. And Jamaica is up at the Capitol very often. She's up there fighting for a lot of the things that we're talking about here today. She's going to be talking about her work with Citizen Action of New York. She's a proud mother of four, a member of Emmanuel Friedens Baptist Church, and she believes that all people deserve dignity and has worked for more than 13 years in the nonprofit sector for national, statewide, and local organizations to help create positive societal change. Her background and past experiences as a woman of color from a low-income neighborhood influenced her core values and made her aware of the lack of social justice for people in similar situations. She's made it her life mission to serve as an advocate and a leader to end racism, oppression, and all forms of bigotry. She has organized and led community meetings with thousands of attendees, and she sacrifices each and every day to make the world a better place and to never stop fighting for equality and social justice. I'm very fortunate to have her in our community, very fortunate to have her advocating here, and she's up at the Capitol. Believe me, when she's there, we know it. Let's give her a big round of applause, everybody.
So I had said to Will, I'm like, he's not reading the whole bio, right? Because I only have 15 minutes. I took notes. I totally tend to ramble, but I wanted to make sure that there were some really solid points with this opportunity to speak today. Thank you, Will, for having me. I want to talk about collective leadership. It's actually a foreign concept to the larger society. It's foreign to us here in the United States. It's foreign to us here in New York. It's foreign to us here in the Capital District even. And I'll speak really specifically to that. When we think honestly about our lives, we're not and should never be alone. We shouldn't be isolated, but we often are told our individual selves are the only selves we should think of, even though we yearn for the collective. We look for places that we fit in. We want to be part of some form of community, and being in community and having support and being supportive of others, it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. Regardless of the idea of, if you tell someone that you had help, that's a negative. You're supposed to do everything by yourself. And if something is wrong in your life, it is only your responsibility. That's how we're told to think, as opposed to the reality of the collective. And really, collective leadership is amazing. I've seen it in action. Collective leadership allows us to not just be our full selves and our true selves, but it allows us to create systemic and institutional change. It allows us to create change that impacts our lives and the lives of others. That's what collective leadership is. So under the current hierarchy and systems and policies and laws, we're told that it's just the individual, as I mentioned. If your life sucks, it's your fault. If you can't provide for your family, your fault by yourself. If you got someplace good, don't tell anyone that you had help. I'm here to tell you I had lots of help. I by no means could have gotten to where I am today if I was doing it by myself. This does not mean that I as an individual did not work hard, that I did not struggle, that there was not pain, that there was not these traumas in my life that I had to work through, but I by no means would have been able to do it by myself. And when I was alone was the absolute worst time in my life. But with my squad, with my posse, with all of those people around me, I am absolutely unstoppable because I'm not alone. That's collective leadership. But we don't want to remember those types of collectives, right? The message is we should not have collective memories. We should not remember collective traumas or collective pain. We're supposed to forget those things. We let them go. The place where we're allowed to be a collective is if we're to paint a brush of our collective, to be a monolith of individuals. That's them. Then we're allowed to be a collective. As a matter of fact, it's usually lifted up. See those people, it's a negative. A true collective is a positive. The resources that exist for the few would not be accessible without the same collective, the collective they talk about. The manual labor of the masses that has been unpaid and underpaid for the entire history of this country. Those few who would have us look at the minimal examples to dissuade us from the reality of our collective worth and collective power, dissuade us from seeing how powerful we truly are, and lead us to believe that they have all of this wealth because somehow they worked harder than the rest of us. When in reality, I have seen some of the hardest working people with nothing. They work hard, they fight, they struggle, 2 jobs, 3 jobs, taking care of loved ones. But they can't afford to buy a new pair of shoes. And when they can, they buy them for someone else. That's hard work, but they don't have a car, they don't have a fancy house. But somehow they're told they're not working hard enough. We're not to look at the other pieces of that puzzle, the systems and institutions that perpetuate their poverty. We're not supposed to look at those things. We're supposed to just look at the individual. But let's talk about the strength of collective leadership. When we look at the greatest moments of positive change, change that increase the scope of humanity, dignity, and respect, during those times, it has been about the will of the collective to make those in power do something they did not want to do. Government is about the collective. Government is not bad. It's about being able to provide for the communities that they represent, right? And being in the community is not to say that we should just, quote unquote, take care of ourselves, because the purpose of our government is to protect and provide for all, the entire collective, not just some, not just certain groups, but all of us. To create policies, laws, budgets, and procedures that protect all of us from violence and provide resources we cannot do so individually. And when I say to protect us from violence, I don't just mean by being mugged on the street or someone physically attacking us. There are other forms of violence that many of us have faced day in and day out in our lives, and some of that perpetuated by the systems that currently exist. Violence against our being. Our government is to protect us from those things. The worldview and racial justice that I live by are key to those elements of social change. We talked about this earlier today. In many communities, change is not possible because dominant power relations are maintained through the power to shape people's understandings of the world in ways that prevent them from asking questions or seeing any possibility for change. If the message is perpetuated that you are supposed to be there and you cannot have more, over and over again, we begin to believe it. There was a time that I used to walk down the street in Schenectady, and if I saw a black man walking toward me, I would cross the street. He looked like my brothers, but I was led to believe that he was a danger because it was perpetuated. I no longer cross the street, and I always say hello. Because we can't change others if we can't change our own way of thinking. This kind of power operates in the arena of worldview, cultures, myths, stereotypes, and values. It is exercised in part through control of the institutions that shape and create meaning. Institutions including schools, religious places of worship, the media, television, mass consumer culture, popular ideas about government and about workers and bosses. Understand me, I'm not painting the brush that every religious house is one of oppression or that all schools are bad. I'm painting that there are foundations that have been used to oppress people in those institutions. I am a proud member of Emmanuel Friedens Church because it's a church that leads with a racial justice lens. It's a church that speaks openly about the oppression that Christianity has caused. It speaks openly about the idea that all religions are good religions. It is the interpretation of man that makes them wrong. And that if a religion is oppressing any group of individuals, it's not the religion's fault. It's the person perpetuating that word. And the same is true of our media and television. We all went crazy about Black Panther, because how could we possibly see that much beauty that looked like us on the screen when we've spent so many years being told that we are just drug dealers and prostitutes? That's what TV used to tell us. Until now, 2019, so 2018, all of a sudden, there was Black excellence. No, there's always been Black excellence. But it's perpetuated in systems and institutions. As I mentioned, the wealthy would have us believe that they've worked harder and are more deserving than people that work 60 or more hours a week and can't provide for their families. Somehow, we're to be mad at the poor and not mad at poverty. But that's hard work. We're told that everyone has the same opportunities, but our schools don't all have equitable funding. No way I'm leaving here not talking about education. Let's be real. This all started around education. We talked today about my journey with education and why it's so important. If you tell me that there are school districts that are worried about losing an equestrian club, that's about riding horses. I had to learn that. And that's the same as our children not having enough books in their classroom, or that there are classrooms that are made out of hallway closets, that there are districts where students sit on top of desks while someone else sits in the chair at the same desk, and that when we look at those classrooms, they are predominantly Black and brown. No, everyone doesn't have an equal chance. And that's not about the individual, that's about systems and institutions and policies. And the only time they've changed is through collective leadership. We're also told that it benefits workers when we give the highest amount of money to those CEOs. We should give tax breaks to those CEOs because it's going to trickle down economics. We'll give them the money and then workers are gonna get paid more and it's gonna be an investment in but that's not what we've seen in reality, that when we give more money to those who already have the wealth, they keep it for themselves. And they still cut jobs. And they still close plants. And that doesn't change without collective leadership. We saw it here locally in the Capital District on more than one occasion, that when the bosses said, this is what we're gonna do and we're gonna cut benefits for union members, or we're going to cut these number of workers out of this place, they had no reason to change their minds until we came together as a collective. And it wasn't just a collective of the workers. Understand that. It wasn't just the workers outside saying, we won't have this. There were the supporters, there were the allies that came forward and said, you know what, I'm not going to support this business because now we're affecting their dollar. And the whole reason they did this was for their dollar. But our collective power made them do something they had no intention of doing. The last point being that we're told we shouldn't regulate companies because it hurts them financially. But it does protect us, right? And government's supposed to protect us. And those regulations protect us, because when we don't regulate them, we see things in the water in Hoosick Falls that make people sick. We see soil samples in the south end of Albany where children are getting sick, where it has the highest rate of infant mortality and maternal mortality. That the air, the water, the soil has been poisoned. But we're not supposed to worry about that because there's a company someplace that's going to bring us a couple more jobs. And maybe some of us will get it if they don't hire from outside of our communities. Those things continue to happen except for the moments when our collective leadership and our collective power creates a change where we say no more. We are deserving, all of us, whether it is because you disgrace us by your presence, simply because of how you view us based on the color of our skin, the zip code we live in, whether or not we were first born here, if English is our first language, whether you agree with who we choose to love, that you have made this decision that our collective, whatever it may be, is not one worthy of the same dignity and respect that your small few is. And from time to time, the few that are in power will lift up someone that looks usually like me, a light-skinned Black person, and says, they made it, anyone can. No, it doesn't work that way. Because that was one person, and we are not a monolith. We are a collective. We absolutely are a collective. And the larger we grow, that collective power, the more change we can create. The more likely we are to see in generations closer to mine, because I do have 4 children, 23, 14, 7, and almost 20 months. And I don't want my youngest son to be standing on a stage like this in 30 or 40 years, talking this same talk and saying, my mother used to say. I'd rather it be that he's sitting at home talking to his children and his grandchildren saying, look at what happened. Look at what we did as a collective. And so that all of you know, my job, my actual job, I get paid for it because capitalism still exists. So I need to be able to pay rent, right? And I want all of us to actually have a living wage. And that won't happen unless we collectively demand it, because New York does not have a living wage. And New York does not fully fund its schools, and New York does not prioritize our bodies. And those things won't change until our collective is large enough to make that happen. And my job is to help create that collective leadership. Not because it doesn't already exist. Understand me, there are so many leaders that are on the grounds right now, but we're not all together. And there are people who don't know that they're leaders yet. Maybe it was their first time doing public speaking and they've never spoken in front of a crowd before, and they don't know how to do that. Or maybe they don't know how to plan an event or a rally, or what's the procedure to be able to talk to your assembly member in Albany. How do you do that? I have information that allows us to be that stronger collective. I found a purpose, one absolutely blessed by God, that allows me to help create the change so that our collective leadership creates the world that every single one of us deserves.